Hi, and here we are, Life in Stages. And those of you who are new to the podcast, a really lovely, hearty welcome. And to those of you who are veterans, it's so nice to have you back. For those of you who are new, Life in Stages is a series of conversations with Canada's finest actors, writers, directors, an opportunity to speak to people who typically, I think, are asked to either promote a project or to talk about things, but rarely to talk about themselves at any length. So this is that opportunity. And I am so pleased that Sarah Orenstein has found time to get together for us to have this conversation. And I guess here we go. Hello, Sarah.
Well, hello, Joel. It's great to talk with you.
Oh, good. And I'm going to start as I usually do, but I know in your case it's a little different. So as a kind of different, like not great intro, but here we go. I'm always fascinated by people's backgrounds, their family life, and how, if in any way, their upbringing brought them to the professions they are now in and to spending a life in the arts. And I know in your case, it is different than many because that is what you grew up in and with. So maybe you can talk about that a bit.
Yes, absolutely. And you're quite right. I don't think I really had any choice but to land in the arts. My father Henry Orenstein was a visual artist, painter, but he also did animation for CBC in the early days when it was all done by hand. And he taught animation at NASCAD down in Halifax. My mom, although she started late in life, was a stage actress as well. So I grew up in a flock of sisters. They had a bunch of kids, and it sounds a bit cliche, but I really did spend a lot of my childhood backstage. I'm the youngest, and I'm probably not remembering it correctly, but I know that I would often leave school and go and hang out at the theater at that point, Neptune Theater, waiting for Mom to finish rehearsal or things like that. So I spent a great deal of time sitting either backstage or in the balcony watching plays that were being rehearsed, and I didn't usually understand. But I think my first time on stage I was 5 years old. It was at the Neptune.
Yeah.
It was a play by Mullner called Lilium, and I was the token little kid. I didn't have a great deal of acting to do. They just needed some children. But it always made me feel comfortable.
Yeah.
I love being, to this day, I love being backstage or sitting in an auditorium watching work being done on the stage.
Yeah. So from, growing up in that world, how did you find your way into the profession? I mean, you were probably placed there, but then at some point you would be in charge of your own life, right?
Yes, you're right. And I did a bit of, early film, TV acting when I was a kid as well. Although I was quite a shy child with people in general, I really enjoyed the structure of, I think of it now as an adult. I enjoyed that world where I got to play around with something, but I also kind of knew what was going to happen. So there was a little bit of that. And of course, during your teens, I swayed a little bit into taking violin and realized I really didn't have the discipline for that. And a little bit of working on visual arts. At one point, I was quite convinced I was going to be a gallery owner.
Okay.
I would take things through the art gallery there on, hanging. It was quite fascinating learning about proper framing and hanging of things. And it was sort of a very highbrow after school activity for me in my junior high school years. Mm-hmm. And I thought I might go that way, and then I sort of started doing some tech work for a local, I was still in high school, amateur productions, and fell in love with the whole process again. Mm-hmm. And that made me go forward into doing semi-professional stuff. And then by the age of 19, I went, no, I'm going to go to the theater school. And I went out to Vancouver, and it was just, I guess it was always what I came back to, even if I swayed to something else.
Sure. And before we sort of move on to your training and beyond, you mentioned that you had a flock of siblings. Mm-hmm. Is it all sisters?
All sisters.
Uh-huh. And are any of them in any areas of the arts?
Yes. So my eldest sister has passed away now, but she was a stage manager for many years, and involved in, too many companies to really say, but she had worked at Stratford towards the end, and then she switched into stage managing opera. And the last phase of her life, she decided she had done with stage management, and she became a teacher for ESL adults. One of my other sisters ran wardrobes and was a cutter and a milliner, and very good, very, very, very fine work she did. And another was a dancer. So her career ended a little sooner because it is rigorous on the body.
Sure.
And I think dancers either become choreographers and directors or they don't. And she did not continue into that. And then my other sister was a flautist and kind of traveled internationally with that. So we all got sucked into it, Joel. There's no way out of the arts.
No exit.
No exit, indeed. Although, I have to say we all had quite wonderful runs at it. I'm still doing it. A lot of them have dropped away, me being the youngest, probably just because of the rigors of the business. After a while, you do get a bit tired.
So we'll get to that. I mean, you went to Vancouver. So how, going from Halifax to Vancouver, was that... was there any element of flight? I don't mean...
Oh, no, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I did know I didn't want to study... Well, I think the only option at that point in Halifax was to study within Dalhousie University, the theater program. And I wanted to go to an exclusively devoted theater school. Mm-hmm. And oddly enough, I remember my mom at the time was in the English company at NAC that Tom Wood had, the earlier version of the English company at NAC. Mm-hmm. And Tom Wood had put it together. And I would go up on my March break and see all the shows and visit her and stuff. And I was in their dressing room one night before one of the shows, and she was sharing it with Pat Collins. Mm-hmm. And Joan, being who she was, my mother was an untrained actress. So she always, although she was a bit of a Valkyrie, she would always turn to someone else and say, you tell Sarah how to do that. I didn't go through the schools. And I remember Pat Collins saying, well, we're all snobs here in Canada, Sarah. If you can, go to Britain. But if you don't want to go to Britain, go to the National or go to the Playhouse out in Vancouver. Okay. So at that point, I was pretty broke. So I decided to try for the two Canadian things. Mm-hmm. And I'm very happy that I ended up going to the Playhouse, which is defunct now. Right. But it was an atelier-style school. And I really feel that some of the people there, especially at the time, David Latham was running the program. Okay. Gave me building blocks for the kind of performer I am.
And what kind of performer are you, Sarah?
Well, that's the $1 million question. It depends on the day. Okay. But I like to believe that the things I took from that are... it sounds so simple to say it, but that the collaboration is a foremost importance to me
Yeah.
when I'm working.
Mhm.
I have no problem being a lead and being it's lovely to be a star, but I always want to build the piece with everyone in the room, the entire team.
Mhm.
And maybe it comes from having socialist parents as well. I don't know.
Yeah.
But that even the smaller parts coming on, they give such a huge amount. I don't want to be in a one-woman show with other people,
Yeah.
if you know what I mean.
Sure. Sure.
Today, that would be my answer. It's very hard to describe yourself as an artist.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's fair. And you and I have worked on a number of projects together over about 15 or so years.
Mhm.
And I think, I didn't know you when we did the first project. And I think it's fair to say that both of us value collaboration and ensemble, the company contributing to the whole thing instead of big parts, small parts. And even when it's inevitable that there are going to be larger roles in some
Absolutely.
place, but that shouldn't be the defining or a limiting feature, right?
And that the focus is the most important. Obviously,
Yeah.
the focus is largely on the plot line of the lead or
Mm-hmm.
the leads, but that the focus of a scene
Mm-hmm.
is sometimes led by the tiniest person walking through, and that you always build the story.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and that may sound simplistic, but sometimes you'll find yourself in the middle of a rehearsal and you think, we're not following the story.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and it can still be a good show, it
Yeah,
can
yeah,
still work, but it's just
yeah.
things that I prefer. I feel that I am at my happiest when all of those, you can have a great conceptual, technological piece going on,
Mm-hmm.
but if the story is always built and pushed forward by every element,
Yeah.
that I think that's when theater works at its best and
Yeah.
it's fine.
Yeah. So back to, I guess back to Vancouver. I mean, it certainly sounds as though the training at the Playhouse was really good for you,
Yeah.
and that you took, that was a great growth period. And in training now, or maybe always, but certainly in the last few years, I mean, just the issue of training and the ways in which that whatever the system is has been corrupt or corrupted. Theater training has come under huge conversation and discussion and debate. But you're not talking about having come out of a system. It doesn't sound as though you're coming out of a system where you were told, as you walk through the door, I'm going to break you down and then I'm going to build you up.
No,
Yeah.
I would say they didn't do that. Although, because it was a very small school compared to, say, the National, where you have different years
Yeah.
being taught at the same time. I think our year they took 12 people, and by Christmas it was cut down to maybe 9. And that group, unless they chose to leave on their own, and a couple of them did, that was the group that worked for a couple of years together. We worked on equity hours. And there was only, I seem to remember, perhaps 2 main staff. And how they filled their roster was they would have guest teachers who would either come in and function as directors or work with you on movement for 3 months or something.
Sure.
So there were ones that showed up that had a little bit of that old-fashioned feel, but I think what one of the gifts David gave people who, could hear it, was we're just throwing ideas at you, and we're just giving you the possibility to walk through many different processes. It's up to you to build your process. You steal anything you want from all these, whether we're doing using or whether you're doing, we did so many different styles of approach. And it's hard to think of yourself as a young person and know if you were aware of something.
Of
But
course.
for whatever reasons, I was able to do that, I think.
Hmm.
There's always moments when you're young that you kind of think, oh, there's a right or a wrong way of doing something.
Yeah.
But it didn't hamstring me too much.
No, Well, that's a very good sign, I guess, both of your own maturity and also of the world in which you were learning
Hmm.
and working.
And also, Joel, I had the luck of it was such a rich time in theater in Canada.
Yeah.
People say to me now, why didn't you leave for the States? Why didn't you? But it was a time that I was able to do a lot of work on period pieces that I love doing,
Hmm.
but also whether it's Shaw or Chekhov or things like that. But then doing brand new Canadian plays, workshopping straight up to performance, and sometimes like flipping back and forth and back and forth.
Yeah.
And that was a little bit of luck of the time. It
Hmm.
was a wealthy, happy time. Like the regional theaters where it was viable to just bounce around and do jobs everywhere.
Right.
Now everybody has had to pull in so tight.
Yeah.
I don't know if someone could follow that now.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I certainly remember when traveling back and forth across the country was pretty standard. And that has certainly because the country has become far more regionally focused than it had been. So you finished school in Vancouver. How do you make the transition, or what is the transition to be working professionally, or to feel that you are, you've done with school and training officially, and you are now a working artist?
Yeah, and part of that was just sheer ignorance and maybe some hubris. I don't know, that I just presumed, well, now I've graduated, I'll be working.
Yeah.
And I think I did have going for me, perhaps because I grew up in an artistic family. I knew you had to be on the ball and do your contacting and
Mm-hmm.
all that kind of stuff, and not sort of wait for it to come to you.
Yeah.
And so as I started getting shows in and around BC and a little bit in the interior, even BC then, there was a seclusionary feel to it. But, you'd work whether in Vancouver or Kamloops or sometimes Winnipeg and things like that. Enough to, keep things going at least.
Yeah.
I started realizing I didn't want to make it my home base. And probably if I stuck with it a few more years, it would become my home base. I think I'm going to say I was there for maybe 3 years after finishing school, maybe 4. I can't quite remember. But I knew that I wanted to move to Toronto. Didn't want to go back to the Maritimes, mostly because I saw how much my mother was away. I thought I want to live somewhere where there's enough industry that I have a chance of staying at least home sometimes. And at that point, for whatever reasons, the influences I have perhaps, my eye was on going to the Shaw Festival.
Right.
I really wanted to stick my toe in there and see what they were doing. And I auditioned, and I credit, Christopher Newton picked me up, and I went, fantastic. I have a long contract to move back to Ontario.
Right.
And that's how that came about.
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough again to work for almost 13 seasons with the Shaw.
Yeah.
I think it was 13. Little on and off. Had a couple of kids in there, things like that. And it took a couple seasons for Christopher and I to kind of figure each other out. But he was very good to me. He gave me a lot of challenges and tricky plays to do.
Yeah.
And variation.
So, I mean, when you just mentioned that you were there for 13 seasons on and off, and then you sort of threw in parenthetically that you had kids. So how, not so much, well, I guess, what's it like? You're developing a career that has, as we all know, it's uncertain or precarious or whatever descriptive you want to or would rather not throw at it. How does starting a family, how does sustaining a family, especially such a young family, how does that work for you and for Rick?
So yes, Rick Wall, my husband, we met working at Shaw. How does it work? Well, you sort of just make it work, don't you? I mean, I think anybody does that. And how does anybody think about having kids, really? It seems to me best not to think about it and just do it once you decide to do it.
Well, you should ask J.D. Vance.
Yeah. Oh, God.
Footnote.
Yeah, footnote in history. I think it was, again, a little bit, it may have been trickier if we were in Toronto, and at that point I was trying to break into TV or something. But there was something about, once you start working for a festival company, and you have any kind of security there. I mean, there is no, for year to year, you do not know, but sometimes you have a vibe that you feel like you're part of that core company, at least for some of those years. And I mean, Niagara-on-the-Lake is a teeny weeny little town. So I could be in rehearsal and zip home on my lunch break for an hour.
Right.
Or if I weren't called between, 11 o'clock and 3, I could go home. And I just had someone with the kids, as opposed to putting them in daycare or anything. I had someone always that I hired at the house. So although it was busy, long hours, it worked pretty well for all of us. At that point, Rick wasn't working with the company. He was doing all the commuting in and out of Toronto because he had flipped over to film and TV. But there is once you're in a long theater contract, you know what your outside hours are.
Right.
You don't know that every single rehearsal day, but once you get that up and running, you know when your shows are. You know that it finishes at 10 to 11 and all that kind of stuff. So I think that was very doable in the first 5 years of when the kids were babies and things like that. Certainly got a bit more complicated when they started school and we had to be more in Toronto, and which is where our home is. But aside from that's just scheduling and housekeeping.
Yeah.
And I mean, how does one, I don't know that there is a how once you start adding children to your life. I mean, it's going to enhance your art just because you get that widening idea of what life is and the world and emotions, whether you want to or not. It just happens to you. I do remember at one point when I was first pregnant, my mom was still alive then, and we were talking about something, and somehow I said, "Oh, I hope I can still work or something, when I have a kid." And she said, "Oh, for God's sake, Sarah, you'll only be better because, as soon as you become a mother, you understand a whole bunch of stuff you never understood. You only theoretically understood before. It just wide. You can't help it. You'll be tired, but you'll be better."
Yeah, well, that's pretty good advice.
Yeah.
Yep. And as you had done, did either or both of your sons spend much time in dressing rooms when they were wee ones?
Not as much because, they changed the rules. You couldn't just, there's always pads and there's all these rules about a little bit, but the theaters and, even, I remember the CBC my dad worked for when I was really young in Halifax. If you were downtown, you'd just walk in and go find him. There weren't security everywhere. And I didn't feel that, you know, now they certainly went to plays very young, probably younger than some kids did.
Yeah.
They stuff happens. The first time I worked with you, I can't remember exactly how old they were, but I remember Rick bringing them, and afterwards him saying to me, there was all kinds of people in the audience saying, I can't believe how well behaved your very small sons were watching such a complicated piece, because they had been to tons of theater by then.
Yeah.
So not quite babies in the suitcases,
Right.
The way we may have been, but they've been around theater a lot, and actors,
Sure.
and a few sets. They haven't got they didn't get bitten by the bug though.
Yeah. Okay. And so, I mean, since Shaw, you have now, I mean, you've worked just about everywhere in the country, and you've certainly worked in every kind of venue and company, from the big festivals, Stratford and Shaw, as well as independent theater companies and small venue-based companies. So you have a huge range to look at, and I'm curious if there are if it's generalizations or statements about how is it different for you being in a large festival company as opposed to, I guess in Toronto at any rate, the more typical one-off production where you've got 4 to 6 weeks or whatever the length of rehearsal plus the run. You start, you finish. There's nothing. There's no rep, right? So you don't have an extended contract.
Sorry, you were gonna.
No. I was just gonna say are those two ways of working very different?
Okay, here's the cheap answer is yes and no. I think they pull on different parts of your technical craft, which is perhaps not something people like to talk about anymore, but the rigors of a 2 or 3 show rep season that is at least 8 months long, sometimes 10. You really have to apply yourself, and it's long days every day for quite a long time. So you have to you have to think about pitching yourself. Like, you may work on a scene. If you're working on a stock piece where you get to rehearse it for that tight month and get it up, you might be trying to break a scene or an idea you don't understand in the script, and you can peg away at it every single day with everybody else. But sometimes in rep, you just start getting a hold on maybe what your question is of why that scene isn't feeling right, but you may not get back to it for 4 or 5 days.
Yeah.
Either because you have to go rehearse the other play, or they're moving on into Act 2 and you're not going to get back to that. So there is a certain learning curve of tracking what it is you're working on. And, some people make notes furiously. It depends what you need to do to hang on to that. Go, I need to come back to this.
Yeah.
And I need to hold on to where I am in my process, and I can't come. It's Tuesday, and I'm not going to be able to come back to this moment until maybe late Thursday afternoon.
Yeah.
So that's just technique.
Yeah.
And a little bit of self-knowledge, I guess. I love the feel of being in a company, but I don't think that is it's slightly a wider, bigger thing when it's a big company, but I can feel that with a good tight company in Toronto or Montreal or something, doing a one-off, as you say. They're very different engines.
Yeah.
One's fast, furious, bit of a race, and the other is a marathon, to be trite. That's all I can think of right now. But
Okay.
also,
Yeah.
I love the different parts of your brain that you use if you're getting together to do a 3 week script workshop
Yeah.
that never gets production. That is a different kind of use of your artistic brain, your acting brain,
Yeah.
than here's your script, here's your blocking. We're going to get this up in 3 weeks and
Yeah.
sell tickets to people.
Yes. Uh, okay. Now, over a fairly extensive career, I assume that as much as some people who, I guess, audience or the general public may assume if they see your name or someone's name with some repetition or some regularity, an assumption is often made that Sarah or we'll use your name today, that Sarah works nonstop.
Yeah.
That it's there's one job after another, and she just the woman cannot is unstoppable. Now, I don't know anybody who is in that position, though I certainly know of people who are thought to be, or where the perception is that. But what is it like, especially having done this over such a long period? I'm saying this as though you are a fossil, which you certainly are not, but you've been at this.
Oh, I do know what you mean, because I'm stepping into that next decade, and I started working when I was a kid,
Right.
So I do sometimes feel like a little bit of a fossil, but sometimes in a good way, sometimes in a bad way. And yes, that is true. That's a funny business we do, because so much of it is the surface appearance of acting, of being an actor. It's like if someone sees someone on television, they go, "Oh, they've made it. They're an actor," or you're in 1 or 2 seasons at a festival in a row. So you go, "Oh, well, you're fine. You're always working." But we are self-employed, and yes, I am. I and my husband are lucky enough that it's been, we were 20 the last time we had other jobs, except for the pandemic. And I really liked being a gardener, I have to say. But there is always the perception that you have made it if someone recognizes you, if they see your name in the press, if they see your name on a cast list.
Right.
But it is indeed, you are self-employed. And, sometimes you get over what I do find about being able to look back at a long career is there's slight less stress involved in the times that you might not be working a lot, because there's the ebb and flow of it. I guess sometimes it's your age and how that applies to many of the stories that are written.
Yeah.
Are you in the ingenue or childbearing years where someone's writing a lot of stories about people in that point of their life, or adversely quite old and they're writing about the end of life? Like, there are different plateaus of available scripts that you match, lack of a better word. And that if one is lucky enough to have a long career, you do have that ability to go, "Oh, rats, I'm in a dry period right now." But I remember that dry period in 1980. I feel the same way watching how much theaters are struggling right now monetarily. It's hard. It's hard to watch people cutting their companies and people having to quietly cancel shows to try to keep the optic of that it's all fine happening for the public. But we all who work in the industry know that it's a scary, tight time for theaters, especially. But I think back of other times when I was younger, especially maybe there was some periods in the 90s and stuff where there were theaters shuttering and things. And it might be the optimist in me, but I do feel those tight times, they do turn around.
Yeah.
If you can, the job becomes keep your shit together, really,
Yeah. Yeah.
and keep your mind alive. And yes, one also has to pay the bills. If it gets that tight, you have to go and find another, whether it's teaching or anything like that. But uh, in the thin times, you keep yourself together and your thoughts still hopefully flowing,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's reading scripts or,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Yeah.
So yes, people will always think that you're busy if they see your name on something,
Right.
and it's probably true half the time.
Okay. Well, that's pretty good.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
I guess. Uh, has either television or film, I know you've worked in both, but you say like all your references are to the fact that you're really a theater artist. And I know you're not saying I would never do anything but. What is that like? I mean, how does one move? How does one? How do you feel different if you feel different being on a film or TV set as opposed to being in a rehearsal hall on the stage?
Um, I really like being on a set. I suppose most of my references flow to theater because I keep getting hired. And once you get into a long theater contract, that's where you are for a while.
Yeah.
Um, uh, I have more experience or just hours on the stage than hours on a set. But I've had a few, whether it's working in a film version, like film is slightly different than television serial.
Mm-hmm.
Day playing can be tricky. You know, it's great to get them, but you arrive maybe 1 or 2 days. You can do the arc of your character, and usually that character comes in with all of the great potent emotion that is going to happen in that one episode, and all the leads are there, and it's their home, and you arrive and have to, like, I'm a woman, so be devastated and cry because something has happened, or be devastated and cry because, or then later devastated and cry, mother, um, or you're being attacked or something like that. And, they're often standing around. They're either lawyers or policemen or stuff. And they're
Yep.
calmly doing this, and they know all the crew and everything. And you just have to show up and like explode. Day playing is hard.
Yeah.
I still really enjoy the challenge, though.
Mm-hmm.
It's certainly, I think the big difference for me right now is you never say no. I feel like I have more control over my own work in theater because I'm there building it.
Yeah.
I have a feeling with the small brushes I've had with larger roles, either in film or ongoing characters in a series, I start to taste, you can have a little more input in what you're giving that editor to finally put together. And that's the biggest difference I felt when I was younger, when I would be mostly doing theater and only just do a day here and there, film or TV, mostly TV, that it was something I did and it went off into the ether, and other people were in control of how much of it landed in the piece, of, which way it was cut. I enjoy having a little bit more autonomy.
Yeah, sure.
Put me in a great big old part in a bunch of films, and I'd probably go, I love it. But
yeah. Certainly, you are exposed to and have an awareness of the young actors, and probably quite a number of people who are in the early stages of creating a career. Do you notice, I mean, because the world has changed in such a massive way, whether it's performance or what's available, with people being able to, and, I guess aggravated or exacerbated by COVID, with suddenly everybody having to self-tape and everybody having to essentially create their own movies, their own TV, whatever it is. You can do that where certainly when you were starting out, that wasn't an option. I mean, that technology didn't exist.
Yeah.
Do you notice a difference at all in younger performers now, with the way the world has changed and the way the world of performance has changed?
Yeah, Joel, it's a tricky and ongoing conversation I find I keep having with other performers, directors, writers, my own age, our age.
Yeah.
Because there is some difference, and then you stop and go, wait a minute, it's just because I'm older.
Yeah.
It's like the details are different, but is this what some of the older actors were thinking about me when I was 22 and like arriving in the middle of a festival?
Yeah.
Or downtown Toronto or whatever. So there is that. I always try to stop myself and go, is this a change, or is this just me seeing it through the lens of my own generation?
Yeah.
I do, like, sort of my side gig is that I love to be a mentor for young performers. Can be writers or directors. And, sometimes I'm just helping them with an audition. Sometimes it's talking about a script they might be doing and just encouraging them to keep going. Or even sometimes just people want to talk about how do you, they're so sweet. How do you get a career going? And it's like, oh, darling, how I wish I had a 10-point list for you, but here's some stuff to think about. I think there is definitely a sea change. All that being said, that it could be through my generational lens, but I do feel there is a bit of a sea change occurring. The things that are for the better are our own awareness as a society of needing to open up equity and throwing down some of the gates of you must be this person to be able to do this part. Right. And that's all great. But I don't know. Theater people are so enthusiastic. We do everything 120 and maybe 300% more than everybody else, that there is a carefulness sometimes, not all rehearsals, but there can be a carefulness of even just how some directors are giving notes now. And I say this cautiously because I don't want to pick holes in advancement.
Yeah.
But I don't know that younger folk are always served by being overly careful of, like, sometimes you go, give the poor person a note. They're not being vocally loud enough. That's not intruding on their self. That's helping them learn. So that's a very, everyday kind of version of it. But there is a carefulness, I think, since maybe it's pandemic, maybe it's that many movements of change all came at once, and economic strife, and there's so much happening. And I'm not sure that the carefulness can help some of the young folk take their next step to challenge themselves to be just a little better in the room and on stage. Now, that being said, there's also a confidence in some young actors that I'm coming across that I just think, wow, look at you. You're very young and you've got so many things on the go. And I think that comes from having all of that technology right in your hand, as opposed to always having to go out. And so it also comes down to the individuals. Some people thrive, and 'twas ever thus, but and some people get a bit squashed by it.
You were just referring to the fact that you enjoy being a mentor. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
wondering through the many chapters of your career, I have to assume that there were people at different stages, or maybe several at the same time, who were knowingly or unknowingly, and I think often it's unknowingly, really important to your development.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Um, and I think often it was unknowingly until I look back.
Right.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, hindsight, pretty great.
Yeah.
And I will say again, David Latham, who I to this day have a relationship. So he ran that theater school. And although we sort of lost contact for a while, we come back and we'll just sit down and talk about shows
Hmm.
and approaches and things.
Yeah.
And that's been a constant. Christopher Newton was, he did a lot for me and gave me chances in a way. I started having babies and he immediately, like, I was back at work when those kids were, my first child was 7 months, I think. And my second when he was turning, 8 months maybe.
Hmm.
And Christopher could have easily not brought me back knowing that I had babies and things like that. And he very purposefully said, do you want to come back? When I had to pull out of a season, I said, oh, Christopher, I'm pregnant. I can't do that season. He immediately was like, so can you do the next? And that was quite a support for me as a woman that I appreciated.
Yeah.
Urjo Correa,
Hmm.
the same at Tarragon. When he found out I was pregnant and I was doing a show, he went, and I said, is it okay? And he went, I don't see why that character can't be pregnant. And I was in a show until 8.5 months and stuff. And I have talked to many women who felt like they were curtailed
Yeah.
when they started having a family. And I was, those people really supported me.
Yeah.
When I start thinking back, there's some of the directors that I worked with over and over. I mean, you had your own influence on,
Thank you.
it was no,
Yeah.
but I mean that
Yeah.
as you say, we didn't know each other and we started working together. And I think it's safe to say we're both fairly private, shy people. We do our job very well, but we're not gregariously, collecting people. And the relationship ended up being over years.
Yeah.
And those are influences that I do treasure because it is such a transient kind of job.
Yeah.
Will come and they go, and you think, I will never forget this person. I bonded with you so much working on this project. And I don't think it's fickleness, but we go so deeply into these short periods in each other's psychological pockets. And only a few of them sort of stick.
Yeah. I mean, with very few, I'm trying to think about everything I've done, certainly everything in the last 20 years. There's something about especially with the kind of work that Studio 180 and so many companies do, where you are focused on a production, that you're not doing multiple productions at the same time. And it's not, I mean, I've sometimes said to people who ask what it's like, say, well, it's in a way it's like summer camp for grown-ups, which sounds very lazy. And it's not summer camp at all. It's just far too intense to be that. But this immediate community and a tremendous sense of responsibility that people have for each other. And so it's all at once. And then whatever it is, 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks later, you're doing it again, but with different people.
Yeah.
And with a different project. So it is, I mean, it's tough. And I can understand when you use the word fickle, I agree with you. It's not, but it can feel that way because.
But again, I think you're getting into the perceptions, the out.
Yeah.
Not to be, but the public perception of what we do.
Yeah.
And that very different thing that's on the inside. And it's a funny world that we do because we need the public perception. So we have that that sort of facade. Even that, I'm not sure if it's a facade, but we have our public game face,
Yeah. Yeah.
whether it's as an individual performer or a company
Mm-hmm.
or a writer. Like we have our game face, and then we have all of the stuff that we hold in common that is behind that,
Yeah.
which it is like a summer camp for adults, but we understand that a really good time for us is rigorous work,
Yeah.
pushing boundaries, and seeing what we can help to bring out of each other to further this story
Yeah.
or that film, or like there's a joy that we have in that.
Mm-hmm.
And it is playful and it is exhausting
Yeah.
and all of those
Yeah.
things. But you get out of this job, you get out of the industry, let's put it that way, pretty quickly, I think. I mean, we all have those people in our life that we knew early in our careers
Mm-hmm.
that you go, gosh, they were talented. They were so talented at whichever field they were in.
Mm-hmm.
But they leave, and the more I think those of us who have long careers, you realize it's not that they couldn't get a job. It's not that. Sometimes it's that, but usually it's they realize what a tough industry it is, and do I want to do that?
Oh, sure. I mean, I remember when I was working on, probably would have been in, I guess it would have been in the 80s. It was one of the productions of Jacob Tutu at Young People's Theatre, and Jenny Phipps was playing Mistress Fowl.
Yeah.
And we went for a walk at lunchtime or something, and she said she had just been offered a play at Tarragon for the coming season, and she was certainly interested, but she said, I'm being offered the same contract that I had 10 years ago. She said, and I'm not complaining, but it's hard to realize that you become more senior, you become more experienced, and you're not, it's not acknowledged in your paycheck.
No,
to be
it is
totally
not.
direct, and
or rarely.
Yeah. And she said, "I will do the work." She said, "I'm not." She wasn't saying it begrudgingly. It was just something that was, when I heard it, I found it very striking. And another example, when Jessica was at theater school, I guess this was probably the first year at Christmas time, one of the teachers at her school had a small theater company, and he did an annual Christmas show. And he usually hired a couple of the students to be in that show. And Jessica had that opportunity. And she called and said, the thing that's sort of amazing, she mentioned an actor's name, and she said, she just finished a Broadway run and she's in this show. That's amazing. I said, it's the best lesson you could possibly have, because that's how it works.
It is true. And, I think that, as they say, there's like 1% out there that don't need to deal with that.
Yeah.
And it is both the thing, a little bit of humility is not a terrible thing. Too much humility is really awful, but if it's forced on you, but a little bit of humility, it can, I without getting into details, there's one or two times in my career where I thought probably, there, I have landed.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sad. That's cool. And I know I'm doing good work. Like, it wasn't that I was getting lazy at work, but I was getting lazy about the idea that I had arrived. And then hitting a dry spot was really challenging. Or adversely, going and doing from things that got a lot of attention and accolade, and taking one of those small contracts in town, and kind of thinking, oh, I can do that with my eyes closed. It's okay. And walking into the room and going, I am about 10 minutes behind everybody else, because there are a lot, they just did a little bit more work than I did because I thought I had landed.
Yeah.
And that happened to me once, and it was a huge lesson. I don't even know if anybody else noticed, but boy, I noticed.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a 10 minutes inside myself going, okay, danger, don't do that anymore. And also, and then on top of that, it's the frustration that there is no accumulating. Like people go, oh my gosh, you have done so much. And you go, yes. And what are you doing next? I have no idea. And they'll go, oh, come on, you do. And I go, no, I have no. I'm really hoping that someone will notice that I'm unemployed, pick me up for something.
Yep.
And it kind of, I think it shocks people and they feel bad for you. And you go, oh, no, it is the way it is.
Yeah.
Please tell me if you know someone who's casting, and they look sort of alarmed and go, how could you possibly be at this point in your life with this much experience and looking for a job? Yeah.
Well,
on that note.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you'll be working endlessly. And I thank you for today's conversation, and certainly for your openness and readiness to be so clear about the satisfactions and the challenges of this life.
And I'm glad I was clear. I was talking to my husband, Rick, earlier about how talking about acting and theater, especially, I mean, or film acting, it's sort of an impossible task because any day you start to talk about it, you sort of have a different idea. And there are no finites. But it's endlessly fascinating, and I'll go off and do a show tomorrow.
Excellent. And so thank you again. And thank you to all of you who are listening. And a note that in order to keep this podcast alive and thriving and just moving along, if it occurs to you that you'd be willing to make a donation to Life in Stages, that was a kind of defensive way of making a request, but make a donation. That's it. And you do it by going to patreon.com, patreon.com/lifeinstages, and the instructions are very clear. And any donations are very gratefully accepted. Please consider subscribing, following if you're not already doing so, and tell everybody, everybody you meet about Life in Stages. I've been having and will continue to have such a great time listening to the experience of many of our guests, and thanks again. Bye-bye.